Performing Porter's 5 Forces Analysis. This paper is meant to supplement your reading of Chapter 2 of the textbooks, not to replace it. Bargaining power of supplies, industry rivalry, threat of new entrants, bargaining power of buyers, and threat of substitutes. Porter's 5 forces are the characteristics of an industry environment that have the greatest impact on performance of the firms of that industry. The fundamental mistakes that students and most other people make when analyzing these forces is they analyze them from a perspective of an individual firm within an industry. For example, they might say the bargaining power of suppliers for PepsiCo is low because PepsiCo has many suppliers. This is incorrect. A correct version of this statement would start, the bargaining power of suppliers is the non-alcoholic beverage industry is low because Porter's 5 forces are like the weather. The weather on campus is the same for every person on campus. However, different people make different decisions to deal with the weather. Long sleeve versus short sleeves, carry an umbrella versus wear a raincoat, etc. In a similar way, although Porter's 5 forces are the same in every firm or an industry, different firms make different strategies to decide to equip themselves against those forces. Some firms might source from multiple suppliers to reduce supplier power, or supply to customers to exclusive long-term contracts to reduce buyer power. When performing Porter's 5 forces analysis on behalf of a single firm, each firm must be analyzed from the perspective of the entire industry before any discussion or analysis of how that firm was equipped to deal with that force. For example, one could say the bargaining power of buyers is the non-alcoholic beverage industry is fairly strong due to the purchase volume and backward integration. However, PepsiCo's brand image and low customer base mitigates the power of somewhat. To power Porter's 5 forces analysis, identify the most relevant factors for each force to identify the direction and magnitude of the impact of those factors. If most of the impact indicates a strong force, identify the force as strong. If most of the impact indicates a weak force, identify the force as weak. If the main force balance each other out, then identify the force as moderate. Here's a few force-specific notes to keep in mind. Threat of new entrants. To assess the threat of new entrants, you must identify a strength of barrier to entry. If you do not discuss the barriers of entry, then you are not properly assessing this threat. If you identify the threat entrance as low, but there are several recent clear examples of successful entrants, you are probably not doing it incorrectly and need to reassess. Remember, the high barriers to entry means a low threat of new entrants and vice versa. Supplier bargaining power. In Porter's 5 forces analysis, suppliers are firms that sell inputs to an industry. Suppliers do not sell directly to buyers unless suppliers are forward integrated or buyers are backward integrated. To assess supplier bargaining power, you may need to identify the most important suppliers first. Then you can assess questions of the relative number of suppliers versus number of firms in the industry. Differentiation among suppliers. Forward integration by suppliers or backward integration of industry firms, etc. Buyer bargaining power. In Porter's 5 forces analysis, buyers are direct customers that buy products or services from an industry. Suppliers do not sell directly to buyers unless suppliers are forward integrated or buyers are backward integrated. To assess buyer bargaining power, you need to identify the most important buyers first. The first mistakes that most would be analyzed is that most is only looking customers. Consumers are very often not the buyer that should be analyzed. For example, with PepsiCo above, consumers do not buy directly from PepsiCo or any other non-alcoholic beverage manufacturer. So the analysis that looked buying bargaining power of consumers in the industry would be extremely flawed. The second biggest mistake made in analyzing this force is overemphasis on switching costs. The relative number of buyers compared to the number of firms in the industry and the volume of purchased versus the average buyer are by far the most important factors in determining buyer bargaining power. For example, in most retail industries, there are millions of buyers, each making a relatively small number of purchases each year. Retail consumers rarely have any power. The threat of substitutes. In Porter's 5 forces analysis, substitutes refer to products or services sold by firms outside of the industry that customers can choose instead of products or services sold by the industry. Substitutes for the non-alcoholic beverage industry would be tap water or alcoholic beverages, for example, not different options for non-alcoholic beverages, yet you would find to convenience store or supermarket. The intensity threat of rivalry. In Porter's 5 forces analysis, rivalry refers to the intensity of with which firms had to compete with each other for customers. Most students mistake the mistake of claiming for every industry has strong rivalry. This is obviously not the case, and it would be pointless to discuss this force at all. The number of competitors, of how easy or difficult it is for them to differentiate themselves, are the main factor in this force. Most differentiation and brand loyalty, which follows it, means lower rivalry. The other most important factor is industry growth. If the industry growing rapidly, this lowers rivalry because the firms of the industry can grow profits without taking market share from competitors.